All right, so I am going to call the Capital Planning Committee meeting to order for Monday, May 2nd, 2022 at 8:30 p.m. Note all members are present other than Mr. Schoner, who I do not expect this evening. First item of business is approval of meeting minutes from April 4th, 2022. Were there any questions or comments for Jeff? All right, is there a motion to, I'll move to approve the minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, second, any further discussion?
There is one typo that I saw. It's in article number 2, Mr. Malinowski moved to accept the minutes with edits as discussed DIN meeting. Just move the little
Thank
D.
you.
Yep. No worries.
Meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Got it. Ding is an actual word, so spell check doesn't pick that up.
Don't doubt it.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussions with a roll call? Brascio?
Aye.
Park?
Aye.
Palmer?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye.
And Malinowski's aye. So that is unanimous. Okay. Mark and Brian will interrupt me at any point they see fit during the next couple of topics. But the main reason we're here tonight, and I'm trying to limit the agenda to really just town meeting items, given that that is 2 nights away, is there have been some what I'll call significant developments on a number of capital articles that we've previously taken positions on. And we've actually been asked for our thoughts on a few of them as well. So I wanted to make sure that we could get together and take motions as we see fit based on the developments. The first item is the Northborough Road Culvert. As a reminder for everyone, this was had a few funding sources. 75,000 had come through as an earmark from the state's ARPA money, and
70,000, not 75.
70,000 from the state ARPA, and then 38,000 was scheduled to be funded through the general fund. The bids have now come in and are significantly higher than the sum of those two numbers. And they're significantly higher to the tune of approximately and it needing an additional $60,000 of funding. So basically, if you take the 70 plus the 38 plus the 60, I think you get closer to where some of the bids were coming out. Is that correct, Mark?
No, the low bid was 192.5, so you're 80,000 short. Little north of 80, not 60.
Okay.
You're doing
but
great,
I know
Jason.
Brian. What'd you say?
You're doing great.
Well, the only reason I'm saying 60 is because that's all Brian was looking for us to fund in his spreadsheet that he sent as an amendment. That's what it means 60.
Well, initially, yes, but the gap is closer to 80.
Okay, so if capital wanted to move forward with a recommendation, we would have to add $80,000 to this article based on the bids if we want to go with this bid process. Is that a fair statement? So it's not the 60 in the document received, it would really be closer to 80. Okay. So what capital needs to decide right now is whether we want to pull back our support of the 38,000 that was originally in the warrant article, and make a recommendation to fund nothing related to Northborough Road and allow conversations to occur that on how needed is this? Is it worth the 190,000 plus that Mark's referencing, and or get additional guidance from the state on how long we have to spend the money? I said 75 again, the 70 from the state. How long we have to spend the money? Can it be repurposed, if at all? Things like that. Or I think our alternative is to continue to support the 38, but now it sounds like Mark is asking us to support $80,000 incremental for a total, over $100,000 to advance and accept the low bidder, which is required under state law, to move forward with the project and get that culvert open. So I have views, but I'm going to go last. And I know Lisa, the select board has asked capital for their views, so I'm going to make you second to last. So I don't know if just hearing those facts and two options that Jeff, Karen, or Joe, if you have any strong opinions of which way you want to go. Go ahead, Joe.
Somebody remind me what the purpose of this culvert actually is. I mean, if we don't fund it, what's the repercussions of this?
Northborough Road stays closed.
And we can go around Northborough Road, right? So
that is correct.
It's really a non-necessary entity, but there's no downside if we don't fund this. I mean, is it any flood hazard? Is there any other, do we know that? I mean,
I think it's just so you can drive on that road and drive over the area where there's water. But
so we're not worried about
Brian,
flooding anywhere?
No.
Okay. We're not, well, this basically just structural to keep the road up. Okay.
Right. And the road has been closed at least 6
long
months, if not longer at this point.
Right.
Yes. I miss driving those potholes twice a year.
Karen, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, so there's some state there. Did I understand you say there's like 70,000 of state funding for this?
Yes.
Is part of our motivation to take advantage of that $70,000? Is that?
So the $70,000 was given to the town from the state's ARPA fund. We have that money. Mr. Ballantyne has that in a special account waiting to be spent. We are checking. It was kind of funny. It came from the state, but it came through the Division of Fish and Wildlife. So we are trying to find somebody at Fish and Wildlife because they're the only ones that can tell us if there is an expiration date on the money. However, the money is sitting in an account with the town. I'm not quite sure that exists, but I need to make sure that money, they're not going to ask for that money back at some point if it's not spent by a certain date.
And can we repurpose that 70,000 to something else in the town?
No.
No.
It had the contract we signed with the state for the money had a very specific purpose, which was helping to replace the culvert under Northborough Road.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a lot of money for the town for the, I don't know, a dubious, a limited benefit.
Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, maybe three questions. First, just taking it from a public safety perspective, is there any benefit to having that open to get to certain areas of town? From fire or the police? I don't know if you know the answer to that, Jason, or anyone else on this call.
I guess the way I'd phrase it to Mark and Brian, have you heard anything from the department heads at police and fire about response times or any issues with trying to accelerate and get this project moving?
No.
Okay. Second question. Well, maybe this doesn't even matter. I mean, just the difference between why we thought we had a pretty good bid versus why it came back almost double, right? And is that just the cost of materials? Is there something else that's driving that? Is the 190 even a safe bid at this point, or could it be more? Is there any type of contingency built into that number?
I mean, I think a lot of it is cost of materials and also availability of materials. It's been driving that. This issue is more than 5 years old. That pipe started to fail and DPW had a great idea of putting a steel plate over it. And every year we'd revisit the issue and the steel plate continued to hold. Now, the original solution to this was simply buying the pipe and doing the work in-house. Because at that point, DPW had the personnel on staff that could do the work. But those, the people who had the expertise have since retired. So we no longer have the ability to do this in-house, which is going to require us to bid it out for a contract. And so so the original bid was in the $30,000, $30,000 to $40,000 range. And now we have to bid it out, and, you're seeing supply issues, you're seeing the cost of pipe, which is, getting a little bit exorbitant. So that's driving the pricing right now. And I have no idea when, if we, anyone who knows when that pricing is going to come back down, is somebody that, knows a lot more than we do.
And my last question, and I'm guessing it's a little game of give and take. I mean, there's only a finite amount of resources, budget, e.g. that, that's available. So I'm guessing something's going to have to come out of the budget if this were to be funded. And I don't know what's on the chopping board, or what could be sacrificed that may have, different benefits for the town versus this, because that's $80,000 is a good chunk of change, and I'm guessing that's not going to be, accretive to the current budget. There's something that's going to have to come out. So, is there any discussion about that at all?
Well, I think this will go to item C, and part of this is
Okay.
we're going to be eliminating greater, potentially up to this amount due to other reasons from the capital budget. You actually can't increase a warrant article total funding on the floor. You can only go down. So we are limited to what's in the warrant from a total capital budget. My understanding is we can shift between article items, but we are going to have an amendment coming regardless, based on what we're going to get to in item C. So it would basically be negating savings that were found elsewhere. I think it's the easiest way to put it, Mark, right? Like there's in those savings maybe are being used for other items such as contracts and other things that weren't known at the time the budget was set.
Right.
So Jeff, it would be incremental is probably the easiest way to think about this if you were to vote to support it.
And the thing that I just really struggle with personally is just not knowing the answer from the state, and whether, we're completely giving up $70,000. It may not be there down the road. That's just hard to make a decision not knowing that information. So anyways, I'm done.
Lisa, any comments you want to make?
So I think I'll just add that, Jeff, there was a lot of discussion on the board of that same question, and we were hoping to have an answer sooner rather than later on $70,000 and the contingencies, not contingencies, but the strongholds that are on that, I guess. Another thing the board talked about was Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, there's 2 houses on that street that are affected by
I think
the
it's only
road.
one house.
One, and then kind of the farmer down the road.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
we looked at kind of the cost as well of trying to weigh if potentially closing that road and just doing something with the culvert itself. There's a walking trail that goes through there as well. So I think the board was really looking for the thought process of capital. Capital's obviously vetted this project. We've all been talking about this for a while. So I think we were just looking for some idea of some of the things we considered was pulling the 38, leaving the 38 in, coming back potentially at a future town meeting. But again, it's weighing the cost of $192,000 on, and again, I'm not trying to sway anybody one way or the other, just sharing some of the discussion the board had. It's take off the 70,000, off the 192, and you're still looking at $122,000 for a small stretch of road. So did I miss anything, Mark?
I think one of the other things, Lisa, and I know this, I don't want to step on, Jason's reference to item C on the agenda, but there have been ongoing conversations with Select Board Member Healy and the two private schools with Fay and St. Mark's about voluntary contributions for capital items. And those discussions have borne fruit, which is why there will be some adjustments that we can talk about in a few minutes to the capital article. I think there was some comment on the board about, those savings are going to mean that things can be purchased with non-tax money. So the impact of those can come off the tax rate. But if we're shifting those funds to cover an increase for Northborough Road, have we really seen the savings? Are you kind of watering down the benefit of those donations? So that was another aspect that was discussed at the board as well.
So I'll just weigh in with kind of some of my thought process. This has obviously been on the capital plan longer than any of us have been on capital because it predates capital. This is a really good lesson on a few things. Obviously, no one saw what we're dealing with from an inflationary perspective coming, but this is a classic story of kicking a can down the road. And I think around communication, I think what has been news to me along this whole process, when this started, when the state funding sort of came out, or we became aware of it, was we actually had the labor in-house previously to do the work. I kind of question why that wasn't front and center to us, that, those, I don't know if they were due to retirement or due to, obviously if they left on their own terms, then that's a little different. But, I've never been in favor of spending more than 40,000-ish on this. And it just, even when the cost ballooned from, it was in the 75 range, then it was in the 90 range, then just north of 100 when we set the warrant, I started getting uneasy. But obviously the state funding still got me to the same spot as myself. Taxpayer wasn't supportive of more than 40K on this. I get ARPA funds or tax dollars a very different circular way. But I think this is, Lisa, you're just going to hear this as the select board member, but this is not directed at you. I know our legislators reach out from time to time to either Mr. Purple or certain members of the select board. This was the wrong project to go for, period. I know they were looking for certain priorities that were either outlined in ARPA or that align with the legislators' belief that we're sponsoring some of these earmarks. But if you look at our neighboring communities and you look at what other towns like Southborough got money for, there were areas we really need far more than the Northborough Road culvert, no matter what the dollar amount is. And I just think anytime, because we know this is going to continue here in the next couple of years as the state continues to release ARPA funds, they have surplus. Well, I'm not sure that you're going to ever always be able to pull together a public meeting and fully vet it. There should be some reference in looking to the capital plan, and there should be some sort of prioritization, which capital will get to. That's kind of one of my priorities for right after town meeting. But how this thing ended, like, I think what I'm hearing from the conversation here tonight is people are struggling because we have money sitting there, right? And, we just don't want to let it go. And, I think we need to take a step back and say, how do we get the money in the first place? And how do we land here to even have to make this decision? So my personal view is I would not vote to support a single dollar more towards this. And would also vote to pull the 38 out in totality. I'm not opposed to revisiting this if Mr. Purple can get some more guidance from Fish and Wildlife at a future town meeting. And or hopefully the inflationary pressures stop. I think we've seen a lot of press around this, that the Fed is going to increase rates as high as they can just to stop the inflation, which will then right size hopefully the marketplace for this sort of work and get us back closer to where we need to be. So while I don't want to end the project completely, rushing a number through town meeting and appropriating something is just the wrong thing. And I would strongly recommend the select board also reject the bids on this. So that's where I'm at. I don't know if anyone has any other comments before we motion it. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, we just had a presentation from Karen over at ARPA, and she made it sound like most all these metropolitan projects and paving and sidewalks and all these sorts of things are, I mean, there's so much ARPA money out there that the projects, there are a nut amount of projects there. And so that all these contractors just have so much work being thrown at them that, you know, these prices are likely probably to hold for a little while. And you know, it could even go up in the short term just because of the pressures that you're talking about. So I have a hard time with this one too. I mean, it's not a necessary road. I mean, you can go right around this. It's only like a 20-second detour to go that extra bit down and take a right.
Okay. Does anyone feel strongly on what the motion should be?
Jason, I'm going to abstain from any vote on this because obviously I'm going to take the vote back to the Board of Selectmen from this.
Okay. Joe, Karen, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence about what you mentioned, Jason, versus just keeping it as is with no additional support. I don't know if there's a way to phrase a motion that it, you know, pending identification of additional funds. I mean,
Where would those funds come from outside of town meeting?
well, the you alluded to item C, like if there's been changes, but is that, I guess procedurally, I'm not sure if I understand how that would work, if it's even possible to do that.
Walk me through what you're thinking of, and then I'll decide whether we move on and go through the rest and then come back to our motions. I don't know that I follow where you're going yet.
I don't know, just as an example, if there was $30,000 set aside for, I don't know, tasers, and there was a gift that came up, which are covering the cost of tasers, and the article would then have that $30,000 free of tax funding that's in the article that's now being covered by a gift. Is that $30,000? Are you saying that could be moved from bucket 1 to bucket 2?
Yes,
Bucket one.
that number is 78,000 if I'm doing my math correctly.
Okay.
Which still wouldn't cover this. You'd be $2,000 short, I think, based on Mark's math.
4,500 to be exact, but
Okay.
small change at that point.
I have to admit, I have no interest in putting not putting $1 more than what's
Okay.
already there on the sheet towards the project, because until we know prices should come down. We shouldn't be paying this much to have this fixed for a road that's really just a convenience. It's not a necessary thing.
I don't understand the ramifications of keeping the 38,000 in there and versus taking it out.
So taking it out basically just means we don't appropriate it, so we don't tax the individual resident on it. Keeping it in at 38 as opposed to a number north of 38, I think actually is counterproductive, because it not only taxes the resident, but you still don't have enough to do the project. So you'd still be looking for an additional funding source.
Yeah, thank you. So it doesn't really make sense to me to keep it in. You know,
I'm sorry. I think it also, I think another point to what, you know, what's being said is that you also create another funding source, which, you know, people may at town meeting, you know, you don't look at things very carefully. So they hear $38,000 Northborough Road culvert. That's great. We'll pay this. It's all set. And then they're going to come back at a subsequent town meeting at some point and say, we need more money. Wait a minute. Why do you need more money? We just appropriated, and it gets a little bit confusing. So it's probably cleaner if you decide not to move forward with this, to simply not do the 38 now and to come back with whatever the full funding amount is you need when you need it.
So could you motion to support this use of state funds of 70,000 and that's it?
We
And then-
didn't accomplish, well, we don't need to motion that.
okay.
We need to motion related to what should come out of the general fund.
Okay.
So I think we have two options. It's 0, or we take the 38,000, add the potential 78,000 that could be reclassed. Those are your two options. You're either doing the project or you're not doing the project. That's what I think. So here, Joe's a no, and is in the 0 bucket. I'm in the 0 bucket. I don't know, Karen and Jeff, where you're at.
I'm in the 0 bucket.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning towards the 0 because I think you're going to be spending 70 to save $70,000, which doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. You're spending an additional almost $80,000 to get state funding of 70,000 when you could probably spend that $70,000 2 years down the road and not get the same funding. You're in the same spot. So might as well wait it out, see the costs come down and or if the funding could continue.
I'm going to make a motion and then hopefully encapsulates the discussion. So I'm going to move that the capital planning committee recommend to the select board that we remove the $38,000 general fund placeholder in the annual town meeting warrant and allocate 0 for purposes of Northborough Road culvert.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? I will add, because I should have said it earlier, this is also in line with where advisory has recommended. I believe it was unanimous based on what Ms. Cook told me. Okay, we're gonna do a roll call. Brascio,
Abstain.
Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. Okay, so that is 401. Newton Street water main. This is a better conversation. So for all the things we just talked about in inflation, this bid came in remarkably favorable. The placeholder, if you look in the Excel spreadsheet that was circulated originally, was that there was going to be 2.663 and change of total project cost, of which we were going to seek funding for 1.738 million of it, because there is bond proceeds that we already have that were going to be allocated to this. The bid results came in and around the $1.85 million range for the total project. So the recommendation on the table, and just to this is the recommendation that I talked through with Mark, Brian, and Karen, is to reduce the total project cost from 2.693 down to an even 2 million. That would allow for contingency, which would change the appropriation coming out of the water fund from 1.738 million to 1.074 million. So basically a $663,700 reduction to what was in the printed warrant.
So Brian's got a confused look on his face because he and I went over the numbers earlier. The number that I had, Jason, was the original number was 2,663,700.
Yeah.
And after everything was backed out, it resulted in a borrowing of 1,687,106. If we're reducing the 2,663,700 to $2 million, the residual borrowing amount would be 1,023,406.
If that's what's in the warrant, that's fine. That's just not what was in the spreadsheet Brian sent to me. That was then distributed to the committee.
All right. I'm not sure. I'd let Brian speak to the spreadsheet, but that's what I had done with him just before 5 o'clock this afternoon.
So let's just open the warrant and look at what's in there, because that's all that matters here, because that's what the amendment's going to be drafted among.
Yeah, the warrant's got the 2,663,700.
Okay. And does it speak to, right? So That's the number I was referencing all along. But does it reference the amount that's actually going to be appropriated from the water fund?
No,
Okay. So really, what the amendment needs to deal with is getting from the 266,3,700, which is in the spreadsheet that everyone has, and getting that down to 2 million. That's what the amendment is. Assuming we all agree with 2 million is the right number to go with.
correct.
Okay. So does anyone have any questions or thoughts around the 2 million? Obviously, a lot better story. All right, so Mark, you believe the appropriate motion, all we need to motion here is the gross cost and not worrying about the bond proceeds that you already have in-house.
Yeah, so we need to, so obviously the article just references the 2663, but does not talk about the mechanics of it. But the motion, which is what's important, is going to reference the 3 other funding sources which exist to offset the 2 million before you get down to the actual amount that would have to be borrowed. Now, I will point out, Mr. Chairman, you do have the moderator sitting out in your audience. And the question is whether or not you do have a 2663700 number in the article. The question is, do you want to make the motion with the 2663700 number, or do you simply want to make the motion with the $2 million number? But with the correct numbers, I guess, as revised based on the bid. Therefore, you don't have to make an amendment off of it, and you can obviously speak to it.
If Mr. Smino would like to comment on that question, he's welcome to raise his hand. Otherwise, if not, I'm happy to reach out to him tomorrow to figure out how he wants to go with amendment versus not.
Sometimes it depends, but he's got his hand up. Here we go.
Here he comes. Good evening, Mr. Moderator. You're still on mute.
Hey there. Hello. Mark,
know
I
your
can't
first
confess.
question is going to be, it's Article 15.
All right, I gotcha. Hold on. I'm opening my handy dandy cream colored warrant that I picked up today. And I just heard Mark going on about the number 2.6637. But I also didn't hear much.
So
Sorry,
Paul,
I was thinking about Northborough Road. Sorry, go
Paul,
ahead.
in a nutshell, the bids have come in more favorable. So instead of the 2663700, the actual number that is under discussion tonight and would be carried forth to the Board of Selectmen, should it go that way, would be 2 million instead of the 2663, 2 million even, which would change the motion. And the question was whether or not you would prefer to have the 2663700 put on the floor and then an amendment made to change that number back to 2 million, or just simply do it the right way in the motion the first time.
Yeah, so you just said change the motion and you meant change the article, but the article is what it is and the motion will be what it will be. The question is a motion that recites 2 million within the scope of this article? And I would say, yes, it is. So I think it's
Okay.
appropriate to just make that motion outright.
Just trying to save a little bit of time. Want to make sure you were on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
So, we'll explain, I mean, whoever makes that motion receives a second, I'm going to ask them to explain it, and they should, front the fact that it's a different number than in the warrant, right away, because that's the first question you're going to get.
Noted.
So this article is a select board article. I assume a member of the select board is making the motion.
I believe that the select board has decided to defer to Mr. Malinowski to let him make the motion. So as soon as I have this, the sheet of motions for the warrant, I think it's just about all set, but council's looking at a couple of things, and I've got a couple of other moving parts that I'm hoping to wrap up tomorrow. That would be nice the day before town meeting. I can send this over to you so you know exactly who to look to for the motions.
Yeah, no, I expected to get that at some point. I was gonna ask you about that, and so that sounds fine.
I figured I would trade it for the consent list.
Well,
I
you guys have
already
free
been
town
going,
meeting
so-
offline.
Yeah,
You guys are straying from capital. Paul, I do greatly appreciate you answering that because it will save us a little bit of time, obviously.
okay,
Thank you.
I'm back on mute.
All right, so I will, are there any questions on the 2 million then? Anyone want a different motion? Okay, then I will move that the capital planning committee support an amendment to the amount to be appropriated related to the Newton Street water main under Article 15 to an even 2 million. Is there a second?
Second.
Second,
Seconded by Joe. Any further discussion? All right. Roll call vote. Braccio,
Aye.
Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Wheeler,
aye.
and Malinowski is aye. So that carries unanimously. All right. If your head wasn't spinning enough, this is where it gets even funner. As Mark alluded to, there have been a series of donations received due to the efforts of Mr. Healy based on conversations with the Faith School and the St. Mark's School. As you know, they did something very similar for certain capital items last year and have returned with an agreement to help fund or fund partially or in full certain items that are printed in the warrant. So I am going to summarize a few of them because this is the magical 78,000 that I was referring to a few times on the Northborough Road culvert. The first change is the fire pickup truck. The Faith School is making a donation to pay that in full. That had originally been sought to be funded through the ambulance fund, so it was not impacting the year-over-year budgetary increase. Nonetheless, that ambulance fund has plenty of uses, as you'll see in a few minutes. And therefore, the recommendation there is to just remove this item in its entirety from any motion related to capital. Are there any questions on that item? In addition, the St. Mark's School had previously committed to funding PPE, the fire turnout gear. That was already factored in, so that is not new and incremental or anything that's changing now, but I just felt like it was important to note that we had known that all along for this year as we had planned, and that was properly reflected in the capital plan. In addition, they've made a $18,000, Mark, I think you used the word voluntary donation to match their funding from last year related to capital. Last year, they had paid for $18,000 of defibrillators for the police. Mark, Brian, and I had a bunch of discussions of how best to deal with the 18,000 in terms of capital, because that is what it relates to, but it wasn't specifically mentioned for any particular item. We thought the cleanest way to do it was we have a $14,000 amount for the portable radios for SEMA, which is a division of the fire department. And we pushed the $4,000 to offset part of the Knox box program from the fire department. Mark, I think you're gonna correct me. I think they actually did specifically earmark the radios. Is that correct? So then the $4,000 is what we had to push around. There were multiple iterations of this, so
Right.
bear with us.
So
Um,
what, so just, yeah, just to clarify, Jason, the one thing they did, what they did is they gave, Jason is correct, they gave $18,000 last year for the defibrillators. And this year, they wanted to keep that additional voluntary contribution the same at the 18,000. So they did the 14,000 for the radios, and then another $4,000, which was undesignated. Based on the discussions, there's item F, which is the Knox boxes for the vehicles at $10,000. We would look to reduce that to $6,000 and put the $4,000 offset there.
Is there any question on those two items? Okay. Final item is an outcome because of what happened with the pickup truck. So because the ambulance fund has plenty of funds to support a capital item this year, but obviously due to the pickup truck kind of being taken out of play, the additional recommendation to provide actual tax rate relief is to fund the police cruiser. So change the source from the general fund to the ambulance fund, which would then lead to, if you're just solely focused on the general fund impact of capital expenditures, the net result of all of this, especially given our Northborough Road vote, would be a reduction of $78,000.
That does not include the Northborough Road.
Correct. Because
Yeah.
we basically have recommended not to
Correct.
proceed. Advisory is recommended not to proceed. You would basically be looking at, if you're solely looked at capital, a reduction to the tax rate due to $78,000 savings. Now, I'm not going to let Mark go into what that may have to shift to, but there were collective bargaining agreements that I know are still being discussed. So I'm just going to leave that off to the side.
Jason, is that 117 now since we've motioned the 39 off the table too?
It's 38,000 off the table, so 116.
116. Sorry, I can't add
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah, sorry, when I say the 78, that's specifically related to the St. Mark's and Fay outcomes. The 38 is obviously a separate one. So assuming the committee is okay with how we've split it out, the intent would be that we would devise the amendment ahead of time. If everyone remembers, this amendment last year got confusing because some of the numbers are the same amounts. So we would put it in writing, get it to the clerk ahead of time, so that when the article is put on the floor, we would do an amendment. I don't think it's going to be as easy as what we just talked about with Article 15 by just changing the amount. This is going to require some explanation of all the moving pieces, and especially if there is dissent on town meeting floor around any one of these items, regardless of the funding source that are in this omnibus sort of article.
I think the way the motion might be done, it may be two motions or two amendments. The first one is addressing the Northborough Road separately because that is not based on the voluntary contributions from the private schools. And the other one will simply be to address the shifting based on the voluntary contributions. So I think just to keep those issues separate, it likely will be two amendments.
Okay. This is going to create questions. I think we all just need to be aware of that. It's all favorable, obviously, but it still doesn't mean that we're not going to confuse someone, because it's confusing to all of us that candidly are far more in the know on this stuff. And so I think it's just going to need to be carefully explained. Are there any questions or comments on the donation piece? Okay, Mark, do you need a motion from capital on that piece? I mean, we didn't really make a decision. It was just more.
Everybody seemed happy. I don't think there needs to be a specific motion. It just was if there was any dissent or anything, any disagreement, then I would carry that back to the select board or Ms. Braccio could, but I think we're good. I think it's great news. I think that, Mr. Healy, on behalf of the select board and the town as a whole has done a great job by taking some of these things off the table for the taxpayers. And again, just one clarification, the PPE that St. Mark's is contributing 20,000 this year. This is year 2 of 3. So next year they're committed to doing another $20,000 for the PPE as well. And then obviously we can discuss years beyond that. So I think it's a nice story we're beginning to tell, and I'm assuming that we've set a base moving forward for some of these discussions. So hopefully these voluntary contributions will continue.
Okay. Any other comments on this piece? Okay. The next is just more of an FYI. We've talked about it a few times. There is a citizen petition article specifically related to road maintenance funds and the oversight related to that. There has been no amendments proposed that I'm aware of, although I know there was a very extensive conversation at advisory last week about the role of Public Works Planning Board and the role of capital planning, and how obviously there is some overlap, but just that Ms. Burns-Fiore is clearly looking for someone to be in that role, and has, to summarize the conversation, is just looking for advice from all parties. When she presents the article, she has certain goals that she can articulate or speak to. This is just one, I think we all as capital planning members, it'll be one of the last articles at town meeting. So, it will be either very late or on a second night. But this will have a lot of discussion around capital planning's role, both in the past and in the future on oversight. We should know at that point the fate of the CIPC bylaw as well, which also contains verbiage around oversight. There's been multiple references to that. So my job is just to make you aware. We've not been asked to take a position, nor that I think we can take a position, because right now all that's been proposed is a role for advisory, which they are looking to change, and capital seems to be the committee that is referenced the most in that discussion. But there obviously is a lot of discussion around Public Works Planning Board, who clearly by just right or statute or bylaw, I'm not sure the right term, clearly have some oversight over that too, but I'm not going to go into that tonight. So any questions on that? Are there any other questions from the committee in advance of annual town meeting other than on the Neary article? Okay. So last, but certainly hopefully not least, as everyone's aware, from the updates we've had now for 2 years of the research subcommittee, the newly formed Neary Building Committee will be bringing the article forward for a $950K feasibility study. There was a presentation that was finalized earlier this evening by that committee that will be made. There'll be some FAQs that are going out. The biggest thing to make you aware of is the select board have supported the article unanimously, but advisory currently is not in favor of it. They may or may not revote because they had 2 members missing. It's a 1-3-1 vote right now. One abstention was the Neary Building Committee member. So either way, there's certainly going to be dissent from advisory. It won't be a unanimous vote either way, no matter where it lands. So I didn't know if anyone on Capitol had any questions on the article itself, or any additional information they needed to make an informed vote, and or whether you wanted to make a motion as a committee to vote on it. I don't know that it'd be appropriate for Lisa and I to vote again, but that's I put it on the agenda to A, see if there's questions, and B, if the remainder of you felt strongly enough to make a motion or a statement from a capital planning perspective.
I didn't watch the advisory meeting. Was there any sense of the reasons why people were against on advisory?
One, the amount, and two, there was a general premise by at least one member that why don't we just shut Neary and move into Finn and Woodward. So the Neary Building Committee has spent a lot of work in thinking about these items. So the two answers I have prepared that I will kind of share now is the 950K is a 2-year sort of outlay. It's not a 1-page feasibility study of this is what you do. There's an extensive amount of analysis that is required to be part of an MSBA project. And the MSBA requires you to appropriate the full feasibility study cost, the gross amount before reimbursement. That's what the 950 represents. The 950 was developed speaking with the MSBA and looking at their publicly available data of what other towns have paid. Most towns, our average, we think, is over $1 million of what most towns are paying for similar size facilities, similar geographic location, et cetera. We came in under $1 million, mainly because one, there's been a lot of work done already, thanks to the school administration in particular, of enrollment studies, things that you would normally be just starting. And two, there's a potential 38% match on this amount. So the real amount is some number closer to 600K that we the taxpayers would foot the bill for if we continue with the MSBA process. And this also assumes that the Nearing Building Committee actually goes the full 2 years and doesn't come back to town meeting sooner with plans or hear something through public feedback. Obviously, it's a public body subject to recording, open meeting law, all of that. So that's mainly the one thing on the cost. Is the building committee ready to react to an amendment if someone tried to lower the amount? I think we have some options there. The main reason you don't just go to the floor, to be completely honest, though, is you want to give yourself some options in terms of vendors, because it's not a low bid process in the next round. It's an RFQ. So you're picking who you think is the most qualified to do the right job, and then you enter into negotiations. So by not approving a low ball number, you're basically expanding the potential number of qualified firms that may reply to your RFQ. And we all know what labor looks like these days in any industry. So that's why, we haven't been trying to get it down. But I come back to the oversight provisions that building committee in particular will have is every penny would be subject to that committee's vote, right? There'd be full transparency of how it's spent. I don't know many other things in this town that go through that sort of process. It's what we did on public safety building. And, we may hit a point where we can't be spending any more money on this because of X, Y, or Z reason. I know at least one voting member of that committee. That's where I would kind of start to draw a line. So that's the number answer, Joe. I know it's long and winded, but it's complicated.
You said reimbursement at the end of that process, we're eligible for a 38% reimbursement. Was that what you were?
Yeah,
saying?
Along the way, it would be funded. It would be funded as we spend it. So if you spend 100,000 in a certain period of time, you would submit your bills. You'd say what it's for. There are certain things along the way that could be ineligible, but our education thus far has been that at this phase, most are subject and eligible, as opposed to when you get into the construction phase, there will certainly be ineligible costs.
Does this phase include potential building plans?
Yes. This gets us to basically construction documents in getting a bid to do whatever construction project, whether it be renovation, repair, or new construction.
So yeah, this leads us to the big number.
Correct.
So to speak.
Yeah,
All right.
It does.
Okay.
I want to answer the other part that Joe asked, and I said there was just a theory of just mothballing Neary, I think is the term that's being used. But does anyone have any questions on cost?
Yeah, my question is the cost high enough relative to the price increases that are taking place with inflation and availability of, people to do the work, to even, devote the time to this study?
Really good question. I think every dollar you try to increase this article, though, you'll lose a certain percentage of the votes. What percentage of the votes, I have no idea. We've been told that this is, not too much or too little. And I think the other important thing in terms of timing is we would not be really spending this money until at the earliest this fall or winter, at the very earliest. So again, my crystal ball hoping that the inflationary pressures, the labor pressures sort themselves out. Who knows, right? But I think we have to start somewhere, and there's a general thought that any number over $1 million could be a non-starter for a lot of people. And we've gotten a lot of comfort from a lot of independent sources that we would be able to do what we needed to do within these means.
And so, Jason, what happens if the cost ends up being over $1 million? We just go back to town meeting to request supplemental funding?
No, you manage the budget. I think.
Oh, you managed the budget. Okay.
I think you learn to live with what you're given, and you try to figure out a way through it. I will say, history tells me that even if there is scope creep in that phase, you don't see like out of scope services for a lot of that.
Okay.
Because it just, you enter into a contract, and unless the committee approves a change order, it just doesn't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I can appreciate the $1 million threshold.
It's a really good question. I think the good news is there's not a perfect answer on this. It's not like you have a bid like Northborough Road or Newton Street that you're anchoring to. This is setting us up to be able to enter a process to go start that.
Jason, is there, through this process, but even into the next phase, is there a chance that we can use CPA, CPC funds to pay for any of the project?
Only if you decide to do some sort of athletic complex. That's the only thing I could think about within eligible sources. But
You had me at athletic complex,
yeah. Well, obviously we're a long ways away. You got to understand what size of the building you're building, etc. And this goes into what I believe capital planning's role is more broadly, is we need to work with recreation as an example to understand where their field should be, like what sites should we be investing in and what sites maybe need to just come offline over time. I don't know what that means for Neary or not. I think they're going to probably say, well, how much of the footprint are you taking? Are you keeping your existing footprint? Are you doing anything there, right? Or are you just going to slowly let it, whatever they decide?
Don't worry, you had me at Fieldhouse. I wasn't kidding.
Well, that's coming in Algonquin next year. So that's at least the proposal. So any other cost questions before I go to why we can't just close Nearing? So if you remember when the subcommittee came in, we talked a lot about enrollment studies, and there's been 2 enrollment studies done. They say 2 very different things. The more reputable one, in terms of the one we really get greater confidence in the methodology, is suggesting an increase. But what I tried to do to at least get myself comfortable was play devil's advocate and say, okay, let's just assume these enrollment studies are completely wrong. What's the only fact we know? The only fact we know is what is our current enrollment today in the schools. And if you assume that's a good representation, and if you actually look across the grades, most of the grades are pretty darn close. There's some years that are 20, 30 different, but that's like approximately one classroom. In particular, this year's current first grade is low due to that was the year kindergarten. They started kindergarten in COVID. That's like the lowest group that you can see on the chart. If we were to just close Neary tomorrow, you cannot actually put 3 grades in Woodward. You can put 2.5, but you actually cannot fit 3 grades in that school, no matter how you configure it. So you can have arguments all day long about what grades go there. You would not be meeting the occupancy permit, and you would max out of classrooms. So you basically, A, not even be able to do it, but B, even if you could do it and you were like within 1 or 2 people, basically you have no flexibility for the future. Now, would Finn and Trotter have space? Absolutely. But you would have to really reconfigure things that, you know, go well beyond educational needs. So the thing that has become at least clear to me, and what I feel a duty to present, is that Woodward could never be more than a 2-grade school. So is it highest and best use to the town as a 2-grade school or not? Because I know a lot of parents, it's a beautiful facility, right? I think we can all agree on that. But it just is not big enough to create flexibility for unknowns that none of us know what's coming. You can guess, you can rely on the enrollment studies or not, but just dealing with reality of today, that was the at least how I got over the hump.
Excuse me, Jason. It doesn't solve all the other problems we've talked about. I was for obvious reasons. So
Does not. At our Neary Building Committee meeting tonight, it was a short meeting, so if you want to watch the replay when it gets posted, Kathleen Valenti, who's the principal at the Neary School, we prompted her with one question about like what she would do differently with the school. We basically had to cut her off. You know, in the politest about, like, and she's incredible. It's just amazing what they're actually able to do. The Neary Building Committee members that hadn't been through the school, you know, went through it last week, and you know, I think walked away differently than how they walked into the facility. Those are the 2 main items, Joe. I just think it's a philosophical, you know, you'll probably hear some references of the school administration has, you know, suggested that it's probably not the best idea to move grade 5 to Trotter, where there's a ton of space. There's no doubt about that. It's just a matter of whether that makes sense educationally. That's not what's up for debate on Wednesday night. That's a potential outcome of what the study will tell us. I think, right, if we have some significant construction costs that we don't believe are affordable for the town, we're going to have to revisit everything. And that's what this funding is meant to do, is to actually come up with a comprehensive plan as opposed to knee-jerk reactions to one item or another.
I think as you reminded me when you spoke to ARPA, I mean, this is a long process, not a short one. And so everybody's thinking, oh, we're spending $1 million now and spending, well, you know, this process is going to take time. So this is more opening up the option of what's going to happen 2, 3, 4 years from now is really what it is. So
the goal, you unfortunately going to have to spend some money to educate. And once you educate and see where the consensus is, then you're going to have to draw something up. What that drawing up is, that's for town meeting to decide at some future date. Any other questions on Neary? So Jeff, Joe, and Karen, I don't know if you want to take any position on this or not. I plan to abstain, but I think I see Lisa shaking her head the same way.
I don't know that I feel the need to take a position on it, because I don't think that, I mean, advisory took a position on it. I think that's, you know, that's their prerogative. I don't know that capital wise, I feel one way or the other. I think it's for the town to decide whether they're interested in endeavoring to do so. But that's just me alone. I don't know how everybody else feels about that.
Jeff, Karen.
I mean, does it give it more legs, I guess, if you will, if we are in favor or not in favor of such? Like
I think what I would like to understand is, at the bare minimum, is there any major dissent to the article on capital?
No.
Joe?
No, I don't have any dissent. I straddle the line of yes and no, but I wouldn't say I dissent.
Okay. So what would sway you one way or another? Is it the number? Is it the concept?
It's more a matter of, I mean, I look at this as sort of one direction in an entirety. As we've been doing the space needs studies and assessing all the other buildings in town. And for me, it's a direction. If we're gonna get rid of the other buildings and we're gonna consolidate and do a whole plan around that, then I think yes, the $1 million probably will be well spent and the town's moving in a direction. If the town decides not to do this, then we're sort of stuck in the same mode that we're in, and we're going to have to spend the money to address the problems that we have and do these other sorts of things. As a personal decision, I'd probably say I think it's worth exploring to do the project, because I think the long-term vision of the town is better suited by doing, adjusting, getting rid of the extra buildings, consolidating, putting people in better space. That's a personal decision. But financially, I mean, we're biting off a huge, by putting the $1 million in, that's not the problem. The thing is the next step. Are we going to spend the $30 million after that? And that's not a decision that I can make for everybody in the town. I can endorse the idea, but if they aren't willing to spend the 30 million at the end of this process, then we'll just have thrown $1 million in a bucket and we'll say, well, it was nice what we thought about it and it was a great dream, and that's the thing.
I guess the one thing I just want to make sure is clear. I'm fine using the $1 million, but you're going to get a reimbursement, right? Close to 40%. So you're really only around 6.
Mm-hmm.
But let's just say you don't get the reimbursement for a second and the town decided to move on from MSBA, or MSBA folded for what, right? Like just, they vote as the expenses are incurred. We can't do anything as capital planning committee until we know the fate of the schools, right? You're not going to go look at a community center, regardless of whether it's an existing building or a new building, until you know whether there's a school coming offline. So the other thing on cost is, if this thing starts to, there's dissent in the community, you're not going to spend the full amount. You can't. You're going to have to just pause it and get the temperature. You're not going to go draw construction documents for a project that doesn't have support. Because remember, it's going to have to go to the polls too, which is an interesting element that you don't do on most of these projects. So it's going to have to get, was it 2/3 at the town meeting, Mark and Brian, and half at the polls, a majority at the polls? I'm seeing head nods saying yes. So go ahead, Jeff.
So maybe one question and then one comment. Public safety building, what was that feasibility study? How much was that?
A couple $100,000.
And that was what, a $20 million building?
Yeah, but remember, we had tremendous choice with that project of how we did it, because we knew 100% of it was going to be Southborough taxpayer dollars. Here, if we want any option for reimbursement, we have to get the full feasibility study. It's a requirement. The MSBA actually wrote pretty much the motion language that you see in the warrant article. That's how the MSBA requires it to be done. The select board then need to ratify what happened at the vote. So if I had my way, Jeff, I wouldn't be going for a full amount now. I would be phasing it, like get the construction drawings next once you know what your plan is. But the MSBA is looking to gauge community level support for investment in this project.
Yeah, and then could you also kind of view it as almost a cost containment exercise as well? I mean, if you don't do this and you go build a brand new school building, I mean, you're going to have overruns. You're going to have costs you couldn't have anticipated had you not done, all your feasibility study and checked off all the all the steps you need to take to get to the point where you're ready to break ground. So is it fair to say that this is going to maybe even keep your cost at the level that they need to be by doing all your upfront work?
I might say it more simply that it's
Yeah.
what you need to do to bid in public construction. So ultimately, there's going to be something that gets done. Maybe it's just the roof and the windows, and we're just doing repairs. Maybe that's what we decide. There's still engineering in drawing documents that have to go out as part of a bid package for them to inform their bids. Just as like I'm just going to give some round numbers. There's 4 million in 2021 costs that are known that need to be done in the next couple of years to just keep the building open. We've been told inflation add about 20% to that number. So let's call it 5. Engineering and construction documents on that alone is 10 to 15% of that number. Do the math. If you just go and do the repairs, that's going to be an outcome of this process anyways, but you're going to get so much more that people deserve to make that ultimate vote. So that's how we've always thought about it as a committee is, there are things you would already be going to do, but you can actually get more done for pretty much the same dollar amount and bring a comprehensive plan to the town as opposed to just being reactionary of the roof's up this year, let's go get a bid on the roof and do engineering drawings.
It's part of what you're planning on giving his presentation, also include the cost savings of not having to do the work on Neary and the other buildings?
No, because we're not seeking, we don't know what we're doing in Neary. And I think we'd be presupposing what we're doing. All we know is that the school committee is very open to turning Woodward over to the town for municipal purposes if Neary is set up to accommodate, more than 2 grades.
All I'm getting at is I think that I used to be one of these people, didn't watch meetings, didn't go to meetings, wasn't informed and didn't know. And not that the town populace is all like that, but telling everybody that the reality is that we're going to be sinking, upwards to 4 million into Neary, another $500,000 to $1 million into Highland, as well as what's going to have to go into Corderville Road and other places to upgrade, to do all these sorts of things. It makes that $1 million seem small, and it also gives people a perspective on the work that we've been doing. A lot of the work we've been doing in terms of a realignment of all these facilities. And without that knowledge, a lot of people would probably hesitate, but knowing that that's thrown into the pile, you're reminding me it's thrown in the pile, that this is the reason why it's worth exploring, because this is millions and millions and millions of dollars that you're going to put down. And if, it makes that number of a new school over in 3 years from now, a new school paid over 20 years doesn't seem as big a deal, because you're going to end up having to spend not just the money in the next 3 years, but you're going to spend that same money, 5 to 10 years down the road yet again, and then another 5 to 10 years yet again, because that's what you have to do with buildings. So
So Joe, were you going to stand up at town meeting and say that?
You want me to tell that important a story? You're going to leave that to me? I really think that's really risky, leaving it on me. My history at town meetings is not very good. But if you want me to stand up and say that, I'll be more than happy to stand up and give the simple.
Joe, we're always happy to have people speak at town meeting, and your opinions are valuable.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I'm more than happy to stand up and say it.
So the moderator's been very generous with 6 minutes of time, I believe, for the presentation. But one of the things I can do in the opening is there is a timeline slide that really speaks to the history of not only the Neary building, but the committee and all the work that's been done to date. And that weaves into account the capital planning committee in the space needs study we did. Obviously, that plan is not perfect. I think we all acknowledge it. But for that to move forward, something's got to move, right? And we think that this is the thing that we need to understand what's happening with it before we can, do anything. Say that we can live without Highland, we can live without, senior center, we can live without X, Y, or Z. Anything else in Neary?
So what you would like is for us to vote an endorsement of the,
Only if you
feasibility
feel the
study.
need. I mean, I just want to make sure that if someone gets up on the floor and asks what are the relative positions of multiple committees, and someone specifically asks for capital, I need to be able to represent what the discussion is. I obviously know where Lisa and I have voted on other committees. Tony's not here tonight, so that's really what I just want to make sure I don't distort reality.
Karen, you and Jeffrey are for it?
Yeah, do we have enough people to vote on? We have 3 people. Is that
You can vote.
Two abstaining,
As long as you have a
yeah.
quorum.
2 abstaining? That's right.
So the 3 of you would go yay or nay, and then Lisa and I would abstain. So it would be, pick however that falls out, and 2 at the end.
Are you 2 for it?
I'm inclined to support it.
Okay, I'll go with you. I'll go with both of you. That's fine. I make a motion to
Motion.
support the feasibility study for a new school at the Neary site for the $950,000.
I'll second.
Can we amend that? Because I don't think it's specifically for a new school, right? It's for,
Yeah, the feasibility to explore all the options. So I think the proper thing is Joe, you need to withdraw your motion if you're okay with that.
I withdraw my motion.
So I would think that if you're looking to make a motion, yay or nay, you should just say vote to support or not support Article 16 Neary School feasibility study.
Go ahead, Jeff. You do it.
so move that.
All right, so you're moving to,
So I'm sorry, your language was yes or no. So I motion to support Article 16 for the Neary school feasibility study. As part of
there's a
the study.
second.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Braccio,
Abstain.
Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski is abstain. Okay. Is there any public comment? Lisa, you're gonna go public comment? You have a question, Lisa?
No.
All right. There's no public comment. The next item was meeting schedule. We were tentatively scheduled for next Monday night was our regular meeting. I'm inclined to push that back in May due to the fatigue that's likely to result as of the rest of this week. And my only question in thinking about a potential date, Joe, is what are you and Tony going to need from us related to ARPA? And when are you going to the select board?
Report should be going to the select board in a couple of weeks. What do we need from you? I think that's a question of what this board would like to do with it. ARPA is not thinking about projects in the sense of really vetting each individual project. It's more endorsing the idea of some of these. For instance, the MTC projects like the Wi-Fi, we only had a proposal for a number. And I know this had gone through our committee beforehand. And I said, well, it seems to be a project that's going to be sticking into the capital plan. So it was something worth funding. And other people on the committee felt the same way, as well as funding several other things that fall in that same category. So those projects will still have to be vetted at a nut and bolt level, regardless. But we don't know, we're a recommending board just like anything else. So we were depending upon the select board, making a decision on the concept of those and then some of those projects and some of those things would obviously be vetted further in the future. I mean, we put 750,000 towards sidewalks. Well, that there are sidewalks, listed in priority, and some of the studies have been done before, but it's going to be up to the DPW to put together those projects and to determine which sidewalks with the select board, which sidewalks are going to get done.
Okay.
So
So you don't need
So I-
anything next week? Is basically
No.
what you're telling me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't foresee anything. No.
And Jason, just for reference, I believe that ARPA is going to be presenting to the selectmen. I think the intent is the 17th of May.
Okay. And okay, so Lisa, I guess my question to the select board as part of that process would be, what do you need from capital for items that aren't on the capital plan or haven't gone through our full vetting process? Because my understanding there are quite a few that are not on the capital plan that would certainly trigger the capital policy based on their latest work paper. So I think we'll use that as direction for our next meeting in terms of next steps, but probably later May is my guess.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to cancel next week's meeting, and I guess I'll see most, if not all of you, on Wednesday night. Okay, any other business that anyone wants to conduct? All right, I will make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Roll call vote. Braccio,
Aye.
Hark,
Sorry. Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski's aye. Have a good night, everyone.
Hey,
Night,
Jeff.
everyone.